The economic relationship between Canada and the United States, long considered one of the closest and most stable bilateral trade partnerships in the world, is under fresh strain. Washington's decision to raise tariffs on a wide range of Canadian goods has unsettled local businesses and policymakers, particularly in British Columbia, a province heavily dependent on exports. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. For decades, Canadian policymakers took comfort in the assumption that economic integration with the US would remain a reliable cornerstone of national prosperity. But as trade tensions deepen, a new debate is intensifying. Should Canada begin re-engaging with China, its second-largest trading partner, despite a relationship that has been frosty and politically fraught since 2018? The question is far from straightforward. On one hand, China represents a vast and growing consumer market. On the other, geopolitical rivalry, human rights disputes, and retaliatory tariffs have made doing business with Beijing a high-risk endeavor. Caught between its powerful neighbor to the south and the global economic giant across the Pacific, Canada faces one of its most consequential trade dilemmas in decades. For David Fung, Vice Chair of the Canada-China Business Council and a longtime advocate of closer Asia-Pacific trade ties, the United States' increasingly protectionist stance should serve as a catalyst for change. The way we're being treated by our neighbor to the south is a wake-up call, Fung said. We have to engage more with China. Being the world's largest economy on a purchasing power parity basis, it is crazy for us not to. Fung argues that Canada, and BC in particular, has been slow to adapt to the shifting global economic landscape. China imported goods worth $2.59 trillion United States dollars in 2024, a staggering sum compared to the relatively modest $8.5 billion United States dollars of BC exports sent there that same year. In Fung's view, the numbers speak for themselves. BC is barely scratching the surface of what the Chinese market could offer. Yet the reality is more complicated. Canada's relationship with China has been strained for years, most notably after the 2018 arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou at Vancouver International Airport. Beijing's swift retaliation, detaining Canadians Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, and imposing restrictions on Canadian agricultural exports, plunged the bilateral relationship into a deep freeze. Since then, Ottawa has pursued a cautious strategy of diversification. In 2022, the federal government unveiled its Indo-Pacific strategy, emphasizing partnerships with Japan, South Korea, India, and Southeast Asia as a way to reduce dependence on both the US and China. The following year, BC launched its own trade diversification strategy, aimed at broadening the province's export portfolio beyond its two dominant partners. Still, US tariffs are reviving questions about whether diversification efforts are moving fast enough, or whether engagement with China remains unavoidable. Trade statistics tell a nuanced story. BC's exports to China peaked at $8.89 billion in 2021, before falling to $8.49 billion in 2022 and $7.94 billion in 2023. They rose again to $8.5 billion in 2024, but China's share of BC's total exports declined from 16.4% in 2021 to 15.6% in 2024. The reasons behind this decline go beyond tariffs and politics. Chinese demand for certain Canadian commodities, such as coal and lumber, has fluctuated due to domestic policy shifts and broader global economic conditions. Meanwhile, Canadian exporters have faced logistical challenges, ranging from shipping delays during the COVID-19 pandemic to increased regulatory hurdles in China. Despite these setbacks, Fung maintains that Canada is missing out on a massive opportunity. He points to Australia as a model. Despite having its own tensions with Beijing, including disputes over technology, security, and political interference, Australia has managed to keep trade flowing. In 2023, Australia exported $120 billion United States dollars worth of goods to China, representing 32.5% of its total exports. If we could achieve 30% of our exports going to China, the US's leverage over Canada would be a lot less, Fung argued. But not everyone believes Canada should follow Australia's example. Critics argue that the structure of Canada's economy makes it far more dependent on the US than Australia is. James Brander, Professor Emeritus at the University of British Columbia's Sauder School of Business, pointed out that Canada's trade with the US is dominated by advanced manufacturing, particularly in the auto sector. These industries rely on integrated cross-border supply chains that would be nearly impossible to replicate with China. A lot of the trade with the US is in manufacturing, especially the auto sector, whereas most of the exports in China are resource-based, Brander explained. So China can't replace the US as a trading partner. The issue goes beyond economics. Trust between Canada and China has eroded dramatically since 2018, and many experts doubt that it can be easily rebuilt. China and Canada appear to be on rather different geopolitical trajectories, said Werner Antweiler, associate professor and chair in international trade policy at UBC. Those geopolitical divides have only deepened in recent years. Canada has criticized China's human rights record in Xinjiang and Hong Kong, while Beijing has bristled at Ottawa's alignment with Washington on global security issues. China's support for Russia during the ongoing war in Ukraine has further strained relations, making Canadian policymakers reluctant to pursue a deeper partnership. The trade relationship has also been complicated by escalating tariff battles. In 2024, Ottawa imposed a 100% surtax on Chinese-made electric vehicles, echoing a similar move by the United States. China retaliated with a suite of measures targeting Canadian exports, including a 100% surtax on canola oil and meal, a 25% tax on seafood and pork, and, most recently, a preliminary anti-dumping duty of 75.8% on Canadian canola seed. That duty is set to take effect on August 14. Canada had to do that to stay sort of in full compliance with its agreement with the United States, Brander noted. And of course, that's a big negative from China's point of view. The tit-for-tat tariffs highlight the precarious position Canada finds itself in, pressured to align with Washington on trade and security issues, while at the same time seeking to protect its own economic interests in China. Trade is only part of the story. Investment flows between Canada and China have also become a flashpoint. Ottawa has grown increasingly wary of Chinese foreign direct investment, particularly in strategic sectors such as critical minerals, energy infrastructure, and telecommunications. In recent years, the federal government has moved to block or unwind Chinese investments deemed a threat to national security. This cautious approach has slowed the pace of economic engagement and discouraged Canadian firms from pursuing joint ventures or partnerships in China. It has also reinforced Beijing's perception that Ottawa is unwilling to treat it as a trusted partner. Canada's predicament reflects a deeper dilemma: how to balance its democratic values with its economic interests. Fung, for one, dismisses the idea that Canada should only trade with countries it shares values with. Canada has to be agile, he said. If we only engage with countries that we share values with, then we stay home. And when we trade, we end up sharing values. Others disagree, arguing that economic engagement with China risks legitimizing practices Canada opposes, from state-backed industrial policy to human rights violations. They contend that any attempt to reset relations must be weighed carefully against Canada's broader foreign policy priorities and its obligations as a member of the Western Alliance. The BC government is pursuing its own path, emphasizing diversification rather than dependence on either the US or China. Premier David Eby recently led trade missions to Japan, Malaysia, and South Korea, seeking to strengthen ties in Asia while avoiding over-reliance on any single partner. Yet, as Brander cautioned, these markets cannot match the scale of either the US or China. Canada is going to have less trade for a while in total, and more internal trade flows to try to replace some of the international trade loss, he said. That reality underscores the limits of diversification. While exploring new markets is a sensible long-term strategy, it cannot immediately replace the immense scale of Canada's two largest trading partners. The path forward remains uncertain. On one side are voices like Fung's, urging a pragmatic re-engagement with China to mitigate the risks of US protectionism. On the other are trade experts and policymakers who caution that the geopolitical costs and risks may be too high. What is clear is that Canada can no longer take its economic relationships for granted. Whether navigating Washington's unpredictable policies or Beijing's retaliatory measures, Canada must adapt to a global trade landscape defined increasingly by politics as much as by economics. For BC businesses on the front lines, the stakes are high. Each new tariff, diplomatic spat, or trade mission carries consequences that ripple across industries, from lumber and mining to agriculture and technology. As Canada searches